This is the No Bull Sessions podcast, hosted by Richard Bull. Feel the music and enjoy discussions about some of the greatest songs of our time. Just music, no bull.
So I'm so excited, man. Today we have Abbey Konowitch. I've been asking Abbey to be a part of this podcast for a long time. I'm so happy to finally have him in. Abbey is a master of the music business. He's a perpetual student of trends and new mediums in music. Here, check out this quick clip.
And I listen to a lot. I don't really listen to anything. I listen to a lot. That's what comes from streaming. That's what comes from playlists. The reason I don't use Pandora as much as I used to is Pandora, you start with an artist, and then you have your experience. With Spotify playlists, you find a mood, and you ride the mood.
We're going to talk about the current music business, the future of the business, but I want to start this episode by going back and doing a chronicle of some of Abbey Konowitch's awesome career. So he started, booking concerts in college at Penn State. He was college concert chairman, and he was also a DJ for college radio. He started his first job making $100 a week, which ended up being $87 after taxes and all that good stuff. That's how much he was making on his first gig. Then he moved to New York City, where he was a junior agent at ICM Agency. Following that, he worked for Clive Davis at Arista Records for 10 years. How amazing is that? God, right? What a training ground. After Arista, he was in MTV and then moved to LA with Madonna's label, Maverick Records. From there, he worked at other labels, and he helped usher in some incredible success with the Disney kids that we all know today, from Miley Cyrus to Demi Lovato to the Jonas Brothers, etc. That was at Hollywood Records for Disney. So in today's episode, we're also going to hear incredible stories from Abbey and his experiences with Madonna, Guns N' Roses, Cher, The Doors, Demi Lovato, Cardi B, streaming music services, the 360 label deals, are they still relevant today? And the future of the music business and what's next. As you'll hear, after working for Clive Davis and Arista Records, Abbey got the opportunity to move into MTV. MTV was at its second phase of greatness. This was like the late 80s, the early 90s. It was still all about the music. What an amazing time. All right, let's get into the interview. I know you also had incredible experience at MTV. And I think MTV is really interesting because MTV of those days, that's when it was about the music. Now, well, obviously it's a TV channel and you got to program the TV, but people don't really know MTV today like it was.
No, it's funny you say that. I was just having a conversation with someone today about Instagram TV that they're launching, and of course what all that YouTube has been doing with music and now Facebook with music. And the reality is MTV in 1981 began putting pictures with music and sort of gave it up. They gave it up when TV became the more driving business for MTV than music. That was when I left, but I'll back up into that. After I was an agent, I went to work at Arista. I worked for Clive Davis for 10 years. It was a great training ground, plus I became the head of marketing, so I had a lot of success there with great people like Donnie Einer, Richard Palmisi, and others. And it coincided with the beginning of MTV, so I considered myself a cousin to the MTV team because my college roommate, back when I was a college concert chairman and on the radio, was the head of communications for MTV. So I would hang out with all of them and go to all of their events. And at a certain point, I thought, this is what I want to do. This is really exciting. And I was fortunate enough that one or two of the changes took place at MTV, and one of their business troughs, if you will, as always happens, I was able to convince them to hire me as the head of programming, which is, interesting because I had never done programming. But that's what they wanted. They wanted at that time an insider to do that. They had been through, of course, the first 6 years of Amazing, and they were struggling. And by bringing in a music industry insider, we were able to really get close with artists and build partnerships. And it was a wonderful time. And as you said, it was about the music when I went there. And for 3 years or so, it was mostly about the music. The only TV that we really did was the MTV Awards and the MTV Movie Awards. They both began during my time. But near the end, we were realizing that the TV shows that we did on top of that, Remote Control, which was very successful, and a few others, even if they weren't great TV shows, they were doing better than video hours because video hours were becoming ordinary and they were dependent on a new Michael Jackson or a new Madonna or a new George Michael or a new Prince or R.E.M. And if they didn't have new product, then we didn't have control of our destiny. So as any business, it's a public company. We had to decide how we could take control of our destiny today, like Netflix has, and create our own content. So it was clear to the music guy in me, and I had really gotten in it because now I'm dealing with the heads of all the labels and dealing with a lot of the really big stars. I wanted to get back into that. And if MTV was going to only grow through television, Remote Control started during my watch, and that was a gigantic success. Then I needed to get back in the record business. And that's why I ended up leaving, and that's how I was fortunate enough to affiliate myself with Madonna and be part of the beginnings of Maverick Records, and brought me to L.A.
No, Madonna, come on, man. That's huge, the whole Maverick Records. But before we go there, when you're talking about like music and television and MTV and so forth, there's a lot going on with the VMAs. The VMAs were really, really significant during that period.
Well, it was the most fun I ever had because I experienced some things I had never experienced before, live television. And for those people, and I would say most people who've never experienced that, it is the most exciting, exhilarating thing ever because you work for 4 months, 5 months, booking, making deals for Guns N' Roses to be on and how they appear near Motley Crue. How can they, who gets the better stage time, who gets the better set, who sees each other backstage and who doesn't, all of those politics, dealing with Madonna and Michael Jackson and people like that who obviously were all competing. And all of a sudden, if you will, the red light goes on and you're on the air. And incredible things happen, during my time there. There were incredibly wonderful things like the Guns N' Roses, who we were so seminal in their involvement. John Kennelly, who worked for me, pushed us to play Guns N' Roses when no one in the world wanted to. And then when they broke through from their play on Headbangers Ball, they became part of our world. And we'd hang out with them, which was pretty cool, be on the road for their shows, and of course getting them to perform on the VMAs.
So tell me about the drama on the VMAs. Sounds like there's a lot between Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses.
Well, there was always drama. I'll tell just a couple of stories. At that particular time, there were some personal issues between Axl Rose and Vince Neil. I don't remember all the details, but if I had to guess, it was over a girl. And Vince Neil had requested that John Kennelly and I come to L.A. for him to do a press conference with us. And we came out to L.A. and we set up at A&M, and he did a press conference. And his press conference essentially was calling Axl Rose out to a fight over whatever had happened. And of course, we didn't know that's what it was, but we knew this was good television. So we aired it. And then we knew when the MTV Awards came around that we had to keep them separate. So we scheduled them separate in the show. And I was not backstage when this happened. I was in the house when, on a commercial break, and I'm not sure which way this was, for those people that will check. Either when Motley Crue came off the stage, Axl cold-cocked Vince, or when Guns N' Roses came off the stage, Vince cold-cocked Axl. The latter is probably my guess because of the call-out threat, but it was raucous backstage. Now, this was before everyone had guns in America, and it was the crazy world, so it was just a good old-fashioned fist fight. But it was insane, truly insane, and we had to, live television. We had to get back on the air. So that's one drama. The other drama, which was during the time that Cher did If I Could Turn Back Time, the video where her butt and other business was highly exposed on a destroyer, we'd gone through a period of time when we had to not play the video until after 9 o'clock at night because it was so incredibly controversial. By today's standards, it would be on primetime network television.
It's like nothing, right? For
Zero.
today.
But then it was very controversial. Sometimes it was for what you didn't see but you thought you saw. So now we booked Cher to be on the MTV Awards. Cher's a very big star. It's a live TV show, and Cher was due to go on the air now 5 minutes away. And she wasn't in the building. And that's a problem, live TV. And I'm the guy who dealt with all the talent. It's 3 minutes before air.
They're probably on the radio like, Abby, where is she? Where is she? Where is she? You can't even hear anything.
Right, and in my face, where is she? With 3 minutes, we got to. And so I only know that she's the consummate professional. And unlike some of the younger, more rebellious artists, she wasn't going to screw us. But anything can happen. So I'm standing at the back door of the Universal Amphitheater, and we're now down to a minute before air. And yes, as you describe it, it was like that. Hey, she, well, you gotta find it. What do you mean? And like it's my, how am I going to do it? And literally 30 seconds before air, her limousine came down the driveway at the back of the Universal Amphitheater. She got out of the car. She turned around to show me that, yes, her butt was going to be on the air, and walked onto the stage. And it was brilliant. It was brilliant because she knew we would have had issues. Mm-hmm. She wasn't going to allow us to have control over her, and she wasn't going to let us down at the same time.
Yeah, she took control of live TV.
Yeah.
Nice.
I probably went to the bathroom right after that. But it was amazing.
After that, you moved to LA with Madonna, with Maverick Records. I mean, that was like a brand new venture. Were you there from the ground up? Like, how was that?
I don't know exactly how many months, not years, months that Maverick had been operating prior to me coming. When I knew that Warner's had made the deal with Freddie DeMann and Madonna, I knew that was the job I wanted because I wanted to move to LA. I'd been living in New York and spending a week a month in LA, and I knew that was the scene I wanted to be part of, and frankly, the quality of life that I wanted. So I was there when there were, 3 employees, Guy Oseary, who's gone on to be, the star of management and Madonna and U2, a lawyer, and me. And we didn't have a vision for what the company was going to be, although I'm sure history will have and has said differently. And we signed a few acts. Guy found some acts, other people did, and we got going. And we were very lucky. I certainly had great momentum from MTV, and that was helpful. Guy had great ears. And we had big hits, which artist-driven vanity labels, for the most part, did not.
Right.
So we had big hits with Candlebox, who sold millions.
Who signed Candlebox, by the way? Because I remember, I was a fan, obviously, of Guns N' Roses and that kind of music, and Candlebox with those really cool guitar solos. I was just like, who? Because that seems so out of the ordinary for a Maverick Madonna.
Well, no, there was
label.
no vision. So it was, the things that came across Guy's desk. Guy was called by someone, I don't even remember who now, about Candlebox. And we went and saw them. And their music was great. Their live show was good. Not to say names, but it was a small company. And one of the people didn't want us to sign them because they weren't great live. And at the time, we weren't in a rush for being in 4th place in Seattle, but at this time, Pearl Jam had been was huge, Nirvana was huge, Chris Cornell's band was huge, and they weren't as good. Our guys weren't as good live, but they had great songs. And Guy and I were really passionate about it, and we were able to convince all of our peeps that we could sign them. And then through my relationship with Warner's, we broke them through alternative and not rock, and they sold 3 or 4 million records. It was great. Guy found another group called the Deftones that were edgy and rock because he didn't get Rage Against the Machine, which he wanted. And we had a great run with them. We had Michelle Indeggio cello. But the real breakthrough was Alanis Morissette. And, for me, it was wonderful because I had the opportunity as the person who drove her global marketing to take her all over the world with her manager, to present her to all of the Warner labels who are our distributors, and to, make history. Because there was really no way that anyone thought she was going to be as big as she was. Every record label had turned her down. We were the last stop on the train. every head of every one of those labels has rewritten history about that, about why they didn't sign her, but they didn't, and literally everyone. And it was wonderful. It was a turning point in my career. It was a turning point in the company. And it allowed us to be taken seriously.
That was an incredible album, Jagged Little Pill. So how many singles did that have? I mean, I just remember it was like single after single after single.
Yeah, I mean, and there was probably 3 or 4 or 5 during the time I was there. And it was great. And Madonna was incredibly supportive. It was just the circumstances were interesting. I got to take the new Madonna record all over the world to play it for the Warner companies, and they wanted to hear the record. So I got them to have to hear Alanis first. And that's one of the ways that we were able to get everyone's attention, because we piggybacked the two together. And she allowed us to do that, and it turned out to be great for her to be associated with that, and to be great for the company.
You're always like looking at the charts and analyzing and so forth. So let me ask you something about like radio versus like Apple Music or Spotify for a new artist, or an artist, I guess a new artist. Is it more important to get on the radio charts or to be on the top playlist on Spotify or the top playlist on Apple Music?
Well, it's an interesting thing. It depends on what school you're from. From the old school, radio is always important. From the new school, there are artists who don't ever want to be on the radio. There's one right now on Interscope, Billie Eichner, I think is her name. Gigantic on the social platforms and digital and streaming. Hasn't had a radio record yet, doesn't want to, because it's the last stop in the discovery train is radio. Now, that doesn't mean Ed Sheeran doesn't want to have 5 in the top 5, or Drake doesn't want to have 5 in the top 5, of course, or The Weeknd, etc. But radio has become Johnny-come-lately. By the time records get played on the radio, for the most part, to their core audience, they're old. People have heard them, since the music was first in the marketplace, because it's immediate. It really is immediate. That someone puts a song out on a Friday at noon, and by 1 o'clock, they could have hundreds of thousands of plays on Spotify and Apple Music.
It's pretty amazing. I mean, look at Drake, what he's been doing. I mean, just this past couple of weeks, it's amazing. So speaking about like that was then, this is now. If I look at like a lot of these hit talents, like Miley Cyrus, Demi Lovato, Jonas Brothers, Selena Gomez. I mean, Demi's just in the news, I think, this week, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Right, but she's still, I think, a really incredible artist, and there's so much more that she's going to give to us. Now, you had a lot to do in ushering in a lot of that talent at Disney and Hollywood Records. I want to talk just a little bit about that.
Well, I think an interesting thing for everyone to understand is, I'm not talking a lot about my 4 years at MCA, Universal, after I left Maverick and before I went to Disney. It was very traditional. We had traditional hip-hop, R&B, and rock, and it was near the end of the traditional record business, where it was all about promo tours, radio, going out and hyping people on your music, etc. I had a year or two between the two, between MCA and Disney, and it really gave me a chance to not be in the bubble. And it was clear, this is now post-Napster, that consumer behavior has changed. Access to music has changed. There is no longer a gatekeeper like there was. If you weren't on the radio, you weren't known. Now you had iPods, you had Apple, you had iTunes. People were able to download music. They were able to buy a song and not have to buy, the album. We never really thought, and this is, I can only say this from the perspective of someone who is an insider. Maybe history won't reflect on others this way, but I don't think I was ever in a company, and I worked for a lot of them, where you put one great song and 10 pieces of shit, and you put the album out to rip everybody off. I just don't think anybody ever thought like that. But to the consumer, that's what we did. And that's why they stopped buying albums and started to pirate music, because their feeling was, there's only one good song, and you're going to make us pay $10 or $12 or $14. You're just ripping us off. That wasn't the intention. And to the inside, it wasn't the reality. To the outside, it was the reality. So when Steve Jobs came around and talked to people about iTunes, and unbundled the bundle so you could buy the one great song, it totally changed the business. It got consumers into consuming and purchasing music again. It was most exciting. And during that period, I really became a student of all of that. So when Bob Cavallo asked me to come work at Disney, which, this is, again, it's not me saying this to be rude, and Bob has said it in many meetings at the time, Disney was not just the worst record company in the business. It was not on the list of even the worst record companies. What had happened prior to Bob going to Disney with the people that were there before was just ridiculous, not understanding the company we worked for and the assets we had and the advantages we had. So when Bob asked me to come work there, on one hand, it was like, how could you do this to me? And on the other hand, well, let's try it, because Bob and I were very close. Bob was involved with Alanis Morissette. I knew Bob well from that. He was involved with Paula Abdul. I knew Bob from that. And Bob was a legend. So when you're asking me about those artists at Disney, it took a while, but we figured out that we had special sauce.
What was that special sauce, man?
Well, we had a television network. So all of a sudden, the guy who used to program MTV was able to essentially program our music on Disney Channel. Gary Marsh, the president of Disney Channel, had all these kid stars, and they used to promote their TV shows by putting these kid stars in these poxy videos of the kids singing into a mic like I am right now in a studio, and intercutting with the TV shows. And there was no real development of those artists. There was no song development. It was a television network using its stars to promote itself. Gary had a hit show called Lizzie McGuire, and neither Bob or I knew what Lizzie McGuire was really. I mean, Bob probably knew more, because at the time he oversaw Walt Disney Records. I never heard of her. And a gentleman who worked at Universal Music Group told me that the biggest star that we had was this girl named Hilary Duff, who I clearly never heard of. And then within a few months, Bob and I made a deal to put out a Hilary Duff album and brought in the Matrix, who were the hottest songwriters at the time, and put her on tour and made great music videos and used Disney Channel as our MTV. Disney Channel would play Hilary Duff's videos 7 times a day. We had to make them short, a minute, 90 seconds versus 3.5 minutes. But all of a sudden, we got hot. Really hot.
And Disney, like, the viewership is fully captured because there's no commercials. Like,
right.
The commercials is just self-promotion.
Well, that was the advantage we had, exactly, which Nickelodeon didn't have because Nickelodeon sold commercials. So we had all this available promo time. So if we made a video that promoted a Disney show in a non-commercial place, then they could air our videos. And so that's why it made much more sense for us to focus on their kid stars. So they had a hit show with Hannah Montana. There was Miley Cyrus, who was a budding superstar. They put a TV show, made-for-TV movie called Camp Rock together, and they cast this girl from Texas named Demi Lovato. Gary needed a male lead, and I was able to convince him to use Joe Jonas. Bob Cavallo and the Jonas Brothers managers wanted to kill me because how can you break up the group before you first put them out? And so Gary understood that, and so the Jonas Brothers and Demi Lovato starred in Camp Rock, commercials, TV. Miley was on Hannah Montana. Selena Gomez was on the Witches of Waverly Place. So we had a little microcosm of a cottage industry, and we became incredibly successful.
Yeah, that was huge. I know that. I mean, it still is. I mean, as we said, these acts are still very, very prominent today. I'm just wondering right now, like, if today, I mean, Disney is still very popular, but television is not, right? Just like radio is not. Like, right now, a lot of kids are watching, obviously, YouTube, and they're watching a lot of the Disney shows on YouTube also, by the way, right? And Netflix. I mean, that's at least what I see in my house with my daughter. So I'm just wondering, like, do you think Disney will still be able to have that same kind of impact? I mean, Disney's Disney, of course, but I don't know if they're going to be able to do what they did with that run that you guys had. It was just back-to-back hits.
They know they can't, and they've stopped trying to do that. And there's a real reason for it, which is part of the incredible controversy that I had to live with every day. So these kids, and they were kids, who were 12 to 14 years old, mostly girls, with the exception of the Jonas Brothers, matured. and became women, both physically and emotionally. And so as they grew up, Miley being the most obvious example, they rejected the controls that the Disney Channel put on them. And as much as we realized, Bob and myself and the team we had at Hollywood Records and the Disney Music Group, we realized these kids could become bigger stars globally, because again, I'm now managing the world for them. And the other Universal affiliates, and especially in the UK and Germany and France and Spain and Italy and Australia, South America, they wanted these kids to be superstars. So they wanted them to be edgier. They wanted them to show a little skin and all of that. And it was a contradiction and counterproductive to the franchises that Disney Channel had. So we had lots of problems. Certainly we had the problems with Miley growing up. Certainly we had the problems with Demi and her personal issues, which none of us at the record company knew about. Certainly we had problems with the kids just growing up. And as a result, Disney realized this wasn't great for them. It was really great for them during the period of time when we were doing it new and fresh, and the kids wanted, the stars wanted to be part of it. But as they reached 16, 17, and 18, and they wanted to, be a little sexier, and they wanted to, maybe drink a beer here and there, we had to deal with, almost censorship. And it was not good. It wasn't good for me, it wasn't good for Bob, and it wasn't good for Disney Channel, which is why they're not really in that business anymore.
Right. No, and you dealt with like youth artists and that youth kind of product. I don't want to say product per se, but that type of genre for forever. And I think you still do. You still work on co-managing certain acts, and you've had ever since Disney have been involved with that kind of youth type of artist, which I think is awesome because it's always what's next and you're always keeping fresh. Now, when you're dealing with those kind of acts, however, you also have to deal with some momagers.
Oh, please.
Tell us about that, man.
Well, no, it's of course it's the hardest part, because throughout my career, and again, Bob Cavallo brought me into Disney, he was a manager. He was one of the handful of the greatest managers of my career during the time of my career, managing everyone from the Love and Spoonful to Prince to Green Day to Alanis Morissette to Earth, Wind and Fire to Seal. And now I have moms. And they were all difficult, of course. But the mistakes that I would make is I would treat them like managers and maybe sometimes yell at them. And Bob reminded me that you're never going to win those arguments. They're the moms. They're the dads. And they are always going to win with the kids. So it was complicated. The Jonas Brothers had Johnny Wright and Phil McIntyre, as well as Kevin Jonas. They were much, much easier and bigger thinkers. And it's why, for a moment, they were really one of the biggest groups that we had, and one of the biggest groups in America. The expression that I learned from someone was, they did get eaten by the thing, though. And as a result, their career waned for quite a while. Right now Joe's doing great and Nick's doing great. But they sort of had issues of trying to be in two camps at the same time, being in Disney Channel and then trying to be cool and hip in a rock band. You can't do both at the time. And the momager stories are well known, and they're funny. They're really funny, some of them. But it's just how it was,
I wanted to ask you about your point of view on this, but like for me, like the 360 deal, just going back to that, I know you mentioned that just a little bit ago. To me, when I was in management and the 360 deals started, I was like, what the heck, man? Like, you're just trying to like just steal from us in a way, or just take and more. It's like, so you guys and the labels, you did a bad job. You didn't foresee what was happening in the market. You were just trying to push numbers, push units out, and make your bonuses so that the next generation gets screwed. So because you didn't handle your business correctly, and because of technology also, because of that, now the artist has to pay the deficit. I was like, that was kind of like obviously I was a little bit younger then, so I was like a little bit more rebellious, but that was kind of like my take at that time, which I think any youth person would be like, hey, man, this is my money. Why are you taking my money? Right?
Well, I think that was accurate. I think it's another that was then, this is now. There was a time when nobody was buying music. The record industry was dying. But they were the venture capital investors in a career. And if you had a hit record and that allowed you to tour, get syncs, get commercials, be an actor, the record labels were getting no compensation for that. Now, in the beginning of the record industry, and certainly in the 70s and 80s and 90s, they were making so much money, they didn't give a shit.
Right.
Well, when they stopped making much money, and yet the artists were making more, that's when they had to figure out a way to stay alive. And it was through the typical intimidation that record companies had. If you want to be with us, this is what you had to do. And some artists, big artists, paid the freight. I never felt bad about the deals that we did at Disney in the beginning. And they were, Demi Lovato was, a girl from Dallas who had never had any career. And so when she was cast by Disney Channel to star in a movie that was a musical movie that was going to get gigantic exposure, and because of that, she met Phil McIntyre and became part of the Jonas world and became a musical big star. She wasn't a superstar then, big star. The deal we made was unconscionable on some levels. And I didn't make it. I shouldn't say that. Disney Company made us make, because we were going to make her a star. And that was for real. That wasn't the bullshit that all the other labels said, we'll give you a hit, blah, blah. Here she had television, commercials, marketing, in-person experiences, and hit songs. So although Bob and I thought it was really not fair what we had to do, ultimately they get renegotiated. Right. Because the artist has leverage. Now it's really not fair. Now all of a sudden they're selling out stadiums, and the labels are getting a percentage of that. That was unfair. But most of the 360 deals were unfair because they didn't really do that much. Now, Lady Gaga and Bieber, two that I know were 360 deals who paid, that was during the time when the record companies made a market. And they were great. I mean, Lady Gaga was most unique, and the label didn't even want to put her record out, which is not unusual as things are in life. Justin Bieber did a lot of his himself on YouTube. He was the first breakthrough YouTube act. But those 360 deals paid, and they paid for everybody. But I don't really think you're going to see them now. I don't even think you do see them now, because the labels aren't willing to sign acts that aren't happening already. And once you're happening and you have, how many million Spotify plays and how many YouTube subscribers and followers and how many sales of your independent records and how much you've done live and what your Instagram is and all of that, where you have real following, they give you a lot of money now. Now record deals had gotten back to being real because they want you, because your plays on their music group increase their Spotify revenues, because Spotify pays on market share.
And you're bringing this huge audience with you.
Yeah. So you're worth money to them now. And the baby acts just don't get signed. I've heard many stories, and I don't ask to hear them, so I know there are lots more, of acts that are very successful in their independent world and very in demand by the labels. And the labels will come back and say, when you just have another 100,000 subscribers, call us. Or when you have this many more Instagram followers, call us. Or this, they have indicia that you have to reach before they sign you, and as a result, some artists choose not to get signed. Now, I still believe, because I come from there, that major labels, when you're, at third base, maybe second, rounding third, baseball metaphor for those of you who don't know what that is, the label can really hammer it home through their use of media and connections in media. Saturday Night Live puts on unknown groups,
especially when you're a global act, because then you have, you have a machine in every single major territory.
It's a really good point, Richard. I think that people lose sight of the fact that most of the money being made now is not in your home territory. If you're a UK act in particular, who are the biggest acts in the world, it's not in your home territory. If you're a US act, with the opening of Asia and Africa and all of Europe through Spotify and through streaming media and through everything, including radio, you're really making a fortune, and you do need an infrastructure to do that. It's just the question is, how much does it cost you?
So do you think that the relationship with like the artist and the label has changed from like that 360 time to, which is like 10 years ago, right? Or 5 years ago to today? Do you feel like the artists, it seems like they have a little bit more leverage, but I'm not sure if like the relationship itself, if they're really more partners now because everyone's making money, or I just want to get your take on that.
Well, it's interesting. I think the artists have much more leverage now. That's for sure. But I just read an article a few days ago, which has sort of been in circulation, that although the record industry's revenues are up X percent over the last 3 years, the artists are still making approximately 12% of that. So it still doesn't get down to the artists. Sure, it gets down to Drake, and it gets down to Ed Sheeran, and it gets down to The Weeknd and Kendrick Lamar, etc. But as a group, artists are making 12% of it. They're making a little more from the record companies. So there's always going to be antagonism because it's still a funnel when you're dealing with the record companies. They only can work a certain number of records a week. There's only a certain number of priorities. So it's really on you. So any artists that are listening, and this is the greatest time, I think, for artists ever. You're in control of your career. You can do it all. You really can do it all. You can get your music out there. You can communicate with fans. You can build an audience. You can play live. You can have a career and a future, and in some ways make more money by getting 100% of the money than 12 or 14% of the money.
And guys, maybe it's making more money, or maybe it's having more control over your career, right?
Well, I think everyone wants control, of course, but I think artists always, real artists always say, making money isn't really my goal. And I think that that's nice to say. But when you work really hard, you want to be compensated. And more importantly, you don't want other people compensated for your art.
Yeah.
That's
right.
key.
But you know what? I think like artists today they've always worked extremely hard. I mean, if you're an artist, that's the CEO of like of a company, right? Where if you're an actor, you come in, you do your day job, you're cog in the wheel kind of. Even if you're a superstar, there's so many other people that are so important to move the machine. If you're an artist, you're the one that has to like pick everything up and actually move it all. Right? It's like, but now, not only that, the artist also has to be on 24/7 social media.
Gotta be.
What the heck, man? It's like,
yeah, I think the artist and the manager is a whole other conversation, a whole other day I'm talking. They are the CEO of their business. And the record companies are just one part of it. Live Nation or AEG, the promoters are just one part of it. But at the end of the day, they're the ones in charge.
All right, so now we're going to get to everybody's favorite part of the podcast, the 6 questions on the house. So here we go for the 6 questions on the house with Abbey Konowitch. All right, man, here we go.
I'm a little scared, but go ahead.
It's simple stuff, fun stuff. All right, so who was your first concert?
You will age me a little. When I was in high school, we all liked the Fugs and all these political comedy groups. So a bunch of friends of mine went to New York to see the Fugs. And the Fugs the Fugs show was sold out. Like, we were kids, we didn't know, so we didn't book in advance. So another one of those comedy acts was playing at Hunter College in New York, and that was Tiny Tim. So we went to see Tiny Tim at Hunter College in New York. And he was the opening act, as it turns out. And he performs, and he's funny, so whatever he was and is. And then this act came on after him. Never heard of them, didn't know any of their songs, but they were mesmerizing and so incredible to watch this singer. Just incredible. The music had incredible seductive rhythms to it. And I remember the singer walking down the center aisle and gyrating and singing. And it was just great. Really didn't know any of the music at all until their encore. And the encore was a song called Light My Fire. And I realized later that I saw the Doors.
That's amazing, man. That's beautiful. Shit. Man, what the fuck?
That was true.
What the fuck is that like? Shit.
Well, it wasn't because you had no expectations.
Right, well, at least you didn't see him in Miami where he got naked.
Yeah, were you there? No.
Yeah, that was
important.
One. Yeah, I missed that one.
And I was always a fan of the Doors later on in my life, very much so.
Yeah, absolutely. That sticks with you. All right, so on the similar type of tract, what's your favorite song, or like the song that has had the greatest impact on your life?
It's tough. Sometimes I think it's Good Day Sunshine, Sgt. Pepper, Day in the Life. Sometimes I think it's Comfortably Numb. Sometimes I think it's Another Brick in the Wall. And lots of time I think it's Stairway to Heaven.
Yeah, that song is a fucking opus, man. That song's
Yeah.
amazing. All right, here we go. If you can just name one, but let's try it. What's your biggest music business mistake? Don't worry, I have too many to name. I just think these are like good questions to ask, man, because like everyone always talks about, oh, these are my successes. These are all the great accolades that I've done. But I feel like a lot of folks listening to us and listening to this podcast, they might even learn more by like, what could we have done better? What were mistakes? What were like these lessons learned? So that's why I asked that question. I think it's good and it's important.
I was very lucky that in sort of my last major job, Bob Cavallo, who I worked for, who you've heard me mention, decided to manage me like an artist. And he knew what my defects were, if you will. And over a short period of time, he both brought them to my attention and changed them. And I think those mistakes were always wanting to win every argument, always wanting to get the last word in, and not really ever being comfortable not getting my way, because I really thought I was right. And I think those are the mistakes you make, that we aren't always right. And certainly when you're ego-driven, and most people are, you think you're right. And it's difficult, whether you're a parent doing that to your kid, or whether you're an executive, or whether you're doing it to people that work for you. So I think, my mistakes were probably being an asshole more times than I should have been.
Well, you were blessed with having that mentorship. And I think that from what I've seen and the way you behave today, and the way you really try and make an effort to be a mentor to other people. And, when someone comes to you and asks for help, you're right there, man. And I feel like that's probably like the schooling. I'm sure Bob had a lot to do with that. Where you're like, okay, well, I had this blessing, I'm going to give it back. So that's really cool. Who are you listening to now that you like, or that you're into, that's new and different? That you're like, I'm kind of liking this new sound, or these new artists.
I mean, it sounds so silly. I loved Camila Cabello last year. I loved her. I love the reggaeton Latin thing that's happening right now, J Balvin, people like that. I really do. I never got Cardi B, but I get Cardi B now, big time. But it's not my thing. It's not what I would be like listening to on my own. And I listen to a lot. But I don't really listen to anything. I listen to a lot. That's what comes from streaming. That's what comes from playlists. The reason I don't use Pandora as much as I used to is Pandora, you start with an artist, and then you have your experience. With Spotify playlists, you find a mood, and you ride the mood.
You just did a commercial for Spotify. That was nice. I'm going to pay you some royalties on that shit.
I don't own any stock, though.
Guys, so you can find this beautiful podcast on Spotify also. All right, back to the questions. Hey, man, the most embarrassing or funniest moment of your career?
I don't know if this is either, but it was fabulous. When I'm working at MTV, Madonna had a dear friend who ran one of our shows, our movie show, and it was her best friend. Sumner Redstone, who was the chairman of Viacom, Tom Freston, who was the head of MTV, came up to me and said, Sumner's here. He was our boss of bosses, and he's here with his grandchildren, and they want to meet Madonna. So I figured, like I said, that's a no-brainer. I go into the dressing room, and I go up to her, and I say, Madonna, some of the Redstones here. She knows who he is. And his grandchildren want to come meet you. And she goes, Sal? I said, well, I'm sure that you would like to do that, or you'll do that, right? No. Why would I want to do that? I said, well, I guess I'm asking, but you know he's an important guy. And she says to me, I can't say the woman's name because I feel like it's unfair. Well, you know so-and-so. I said, well, of course, she works for us. You need to give her a raise. And I said, huh? She said, she tells me that she's underpaid and you should give her a raise. I said, can we talk about this some other time? I've got some of the Redstone and his grandchildren backstage, and they want to come back and say hello to you. She goes, you don't understand. These are connected. I said, what do you mean? She says, I'll see some of the Redstone's grandchildren if you give a raise. How am I going to deal with this one? This was a tough one. Now, she was the biggest star in the world, and he was our boss. I said, I can't promise you that. Well, then I can't see the kids. I said, but the reason I can't promise you is she doesn't work for me. So I can't promise you unless you want me to lie to you. And I don't really know how we ended up concluding, but the kids came back and got a raise. That's all. And it was just to bust my balls.
Okay, got it.
Totally just to bust my balls. Because I was making it seem so important, and she had to think of what was equally as important to her.
Yeah, let me bust your chops. You're making me do something out of my way? Well, here you go. Nice.
Yeah,
Good job, Don.
but, when you work with artists, you always have embarrassing things. There's no question. Because, either you say things to them that are the wrong thing, or you find yourself in situations. I know I've had embarrassing ones, and maybe I'll remember and tell you some later. But they're not coming to mind now, which I'm glad about.
We'll talk about it at lunch, and then I'll fill you guys in.
So I just remembered a couple of embarrassing things. And I think they're important to share because it's happened to me twice. And it'll happen to any of you, and I'm sure it's happened to you, Richard. Whether it's to pick up the wrong phone line and to lecture somebody on a third party and have the third party be the one who's on the phone and not the person you're lecturing. Happened to me. Absolutely. Tore somebody a new asshole, and it was direct. Or pressing, and I know we've all done that too, reply all. Never press reply all. Because one person will take that information wrong. I've done it. I've done both. I've picked up the wrong phone and said the wrong thing to the right person, maybe, and I've absolutely pressed reply all and been embarrassed beyond belief.
Hey, so another question. What are your non-music hobbies? Surprise us.
I love to walk on the beach. I really do. I love to work out. I used to play tennis and I miss it. I love to read, and I love to listen to music. And as weird as it sounds, I love to know what the heck is going on everywhere. I'm obsessed with knowledge. Sometimes useless knowledge, but I hate to not know.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast as much as I did with our special guest, Abbey Konowitch, all about the music business. So if you want to get in touch with Abbey, he was nice enough to share his email address with us. It's abbeykonowitch at rockmanialive.com. That's Abbey, A-B-B-E-Y, Konowitch, Konowitch, at rockmanialive.com. That's cool. Abbey, man, I want to thank you so much for being here. It's an honor just to spend this hour and a half, 2 hours with you.
Thanks for giving me the time to talk about me.
I love it, man. We all want to hear about you. It's beautiful. So this is it, guys. This is the No Bull Sessions. You know, we talk about music business. We talk about new artists. We talk about crazy stories from the music business.
This has been the No Bull Sessions podcast, hosted by Richard Bull, found on Instagram at Richard Bull Toro. Make sure to comment on this podcast or leave us a voice note to be featured on future podcasts. We'll see you next time on the No Bull Sessions podcast. Just music, no bull.